People always ask which Botez sister is better. And honestly, I wish I could tell you, I really don't know. Maybe one day there will be some sort of chess ranking system to evaluate your strength. But until then, we'll just use other methods to find out. Which is why in today's video, my sister and I are going head to head in a blitz match. And the pressure was extra high. Our chess coach, Grandmaster Hammer, was not only watching, but commentating the entire match. It was first to 5, and the loser gets disowned from the Botez family forever. Well, until the next rematch.
We're off and the game has started in the first one. She's probably gonna go for the London system. And this is why Alexandra goes c5 immediately. The only way to punish this move is to play the white pawn forward. But Andrea has prepared this extensively before the match with a coach that chooses to remain anonymous. Playing with the bishop check, then supporting her bishop with the pawn to a4. Good play so far by Andrea. She's developing her pieces on the other side of the board. Alexandra with her knight putting pressure on white's bishop. The bishop now has to make a decision. Andrea chooses to retreat the bishop back. Andrea plays a5 when black has not played a6. Interesting choice. I wonder who told her that a5 is generally a good move. This would be the exception, unfortunately. Castling from both sides, getting the pieces into play. And here we see Alexandra exploiting that mistake, pushing the pawn forward on the edge of the board too soon. That has enabled black to take the initiative on the queen side, right-hand side of the board. The files are opening up on the edge of the board. The two rooks now looking at each other. Andrea spending, I would say, too much time at this stage in the game. She's down by 30 seconds on the clock. In general, it can often be a good idea to not be the one initiating trades, because very often you want to trade off the well-placed opposition pieces. When you make a trade with your opponent, it often means that they get a new piece to replace that good positioning, except for when the trades are happening on the side of the board. In this case, it was a good idea for Andrea to make the trade because that forced Alexandra's knight out to the corner of the board, which is not the best place for a knight. That being said, Andrea has not really gotten the memo about the time control. She's down 1 minute and 20 seconds on the clock. She's fully relying on those extra 2 seconds she's getting per move that's being made. Knight d2, good move for Andrea. She's trying to maneuver the knight over to the queen side, trying to exploit some of the black weaknesses over there. Alexandra now bringing her knight back in from the corner of the board, but this gives Andrea an opportunity to win a piece in the center. f4, attacking the knight. The knight has nowhere to move. It looks as though Andrea is gonna go ahead in this match and win the first one. However, Andrea only has 40 seconds left. With her bishops, she's pointing in towards the center of the board, Alexandra is, and that pressure is going to be slightly uncomfortable for Andrea to deal with, not to mention the fact that she's now down to just 20 seconds on the clock. Time management really not good here from the younger sister. Andrea now moving her queen up into black's territory. That's going to be potentially dangerous for the white queen. The white queen right now surrendered by black pieces, and the queen could very well get trapped here. The white queen needs to be extremely careful about how she proceeds. In the meantime, Alexandra takes a white pawn, but that gets struck back at. The white knight coming in, attacking the black bishop. The bishop has to move. Alexandra seems to realize her mistake on the previous move, spending lots of time trying to find a good move in a bad position, but she doesn't succeed, because that's the problem with a bad position. There are no good moves. The rook comes in, attacks the bishop. That's an unnecessarily risky move from Andrea, because now the bishop can't attack the white knight. The white knight cannot move, because then you lose the rook. Mistake from Andrea. She's down to just 2 seconds on the clock. She loses on time. Andrea doesn't move, and she loses on time and in a winning position. Okay, here we go. Knight out. Andrea opting for a different opening than her sister. She's going for the King's Indian defense. Alexandra here always plays this same-ish variation, getting all those pawns into the center of the board. Very predictable play by Alexandra. Okay, knight to e2, trying to defend that pawn in the center. Andrea can now go for the accelerated dragon, which is one of her openings. Instead, she chooses to move her knight in towards the center of the board. Not really what we looked at, but okay. Queen up from Alexandra. I actually tried giving Andrea like a good opening to play against Alexandra because I want to have Alexandra stop playing this line against the King's Indian. But right now, it looks as though white has a really, really nice position. And once again, Andrea spending a lot of time. Queen a5, good move. Getting the queen out, putting some pressure in towards the white position. King b1, also good move. Making sure that all the pawns on the left side of the board is defended. e5, pushing forward in the center. Good move from Andrea. She needed to get more central control. She needs to start an attack on the queen side before Alexandra manages to start an attack on the opposite flank. a6 is a brilliant move for black, preparing to sacrifice a pawn on the left side of the board, trying to get rid of pawns so that you open up for the rooks to point down on the white king. Knight c1 from Alexandra, a good defensive move, because now if black tries to get their knight into the attack, the black queen will be trapped afterwards. Andrea opts for the trade of pawns. This is because now she can point her rook down on the white king. Going with the queen to attack the bishop, that's fine. The bishop will retreat. Andrea then will push her a pawn, the side pawn, forward to try and include more attackers into this game. Okay, I said Andrea was going to push her side pawn forward. She's taking her sweet, sweet time with it. That strategy did not pay off in the previous one. Rook b8, pointing the rook down on white's king. Probably the king will hide in the corner. No, Alexandra decides that the king is safe, even though there's both a black rook and queen pointing down on the king. Instead, Alexandra starts the counterattack on the opposite flank. Both players now trying to checkmate the opposing king. Knight c5, the knight is getting involved. The king tried to hide in the corner, but there's still lots of black pieces in the vicinity. And now Alexandra is also feeling that time pressure looming. Pawn to a3, it's always dangerous moving the pawns in front of your own king. But here, this is actually a way to get more defenders because when the black queen moves now, the white bishop will be able to get into a defensive stance. That was not it, though. That was the wrong bishop. Alexandra disrespects the bishop pair, and as such, the engines now feel black has a massive advantage. Alexandra with a 40-second lead on the clock, now putting pressure on black's queen. Andrea not really looking sufficiently panicked for a person with only 13 seconds left. She moves her queen as far into enemy territory as she could. The queen now putting pressure in towards the white bishop, but the white rook immediately dispels the queen from its positioning. 30-second advantage for Alexandra, but there is more pressure on white's king than there is towards the black king. But here Alexandra goes for the queen trade. Andrea tries to avoid the queen trade, but then she gets stuck in a fork. The pawn coming forward, attacking both the knight and the bishop. Alexandra wins a piece on this maneuvering. She understood that Andrea wouldn't want to trade queens, but actually avoiding the queen trade just led to an even bigger disaster. Andrea now down a full piece, as well as being very, very low on the clock. Alexandra going for the queen trade, and Andrea with the standard Botez gambit to kick us off, and Alexandra takes the second one as well. We're just continuing in the same way. And Alexandra, being happy with the success of her opening in the previous game, she repeats. Wow, you're blundering a pawn in the center of the board. Both players missed that black could just capture the pawn in the middle. Okay, I guess we're gonna let that slide. And Andrea goes for this a5 move again, which was bad in the previous game, and it's bad in this game. Alexandra has been able to push her pawns forward on the queen side. Andrea striking in the center of the board to counteract that initiative. The engines are indicating a massive advantage for black. How are all these trades going to work out? Alexandra decides to retreat her knight. The white pawns in the center, they're very far advanced, but the question is whether or not white will be able to keep them in their advanced positions. Oh, Andrea's taking her time. I guess I should have realized whose turn it was based on the amount of time being used. Andrea decides not to move the pawn in the center that was being threatened, but instead activates her queen on the side of the board, and the engine is actually saying that was a brilliant move, trying to cause the maximum amount of difficulty for the opponent. She then follows up with the knight coming in. The knight cannot be captured by the black knight because then the black queen would be undefended. The white knight is very bothersome, so it should be taken out. Alexandra grabs the central pawn thereafter. The disadvantage of grabbing that pawn is that now the black pawn on c5 is undefended, and Andrea sees that and seizes that opportunity right away. We're on equal number of pawns right now, but Alexandra, with her latest move, opening up for her bishop, pointing down towards an undefended white pawn on the side of the board, in addition to the pawn in the center now attacking the white knight. Alexandra opts to capture a pawn in the center. Trades are being made, and it does seem as though black will have the upper hand at the end of these trades. Andrea chooses to save her pawn from being captured, but in doing so, she allows Alexandra to keep the central pawn defended. And in general, you'd rather have a pawn in the middle than a pawn on the side of the board. So strategically, this was the wrong decision for Andrea. And now the win is just a matter of technique. e5 on the board. Okay, that defends both pawns in the same move, but at the same time, white's pieces have become more dangerously positioned. Andrea is gonna have to create some lift to get that king out of trouble. Oh wow, instead she goes for the trade of rooks. Very unorthodox decision when you're down on number of pawns, but she has seen that she will be able to attack the black pawn on b4. That's a pawn standing on the same color square as the white bishop. Andrea coming in with the fork, she gets the pawn back, and she's managed to equalize the game as we go into a time scramble. And right now, honestly, it's Andrea having the better of it. Andrea is the one with the king approaching the black pawns quicker, and Andrea gives away a bishop. And look at this technique from Alexandra, where very well played, getting her knight forward, getting her pawn forward, the knight and bishop working together beautifully to get that final pawn moving forward. Alexandra instead going for the repetition, then finding the right plan, moving her king over. Okay, Alexandra could have just promoted to a queen, but this will be good enough. The knight comes back in time, and now for the checkmate. Next move, new queen, checkmate, 3-0. And we're off with game 4. The pawn being rushed forward in the center of the board. Andrea not really succeeding with her opening in the previous one. Is she now going to play knight c6 that you're kind of supposed to play in these situations? Then Alexandra decides to put her knight out on the edge of the board. Unorthodox play, I think is fair to say, from both parties. Then h5. Wow. I honestly think Andrea would play her openings better if she hadn't asked me for advice. The pawns are now being traded off, and Alexandra has pushed her pawns forward on the king side. She's going for the quick checkmating attack. She's just pushing her pawns forward, whether it's good or not. She doesn't really care. Andrea, on the other hand, should accept the gifts that are being offered. I don't know why Andrea didn't take that free pawn, but she didn't. And now Alexandra has gotten the pressure towards the black king without even having to give up a pawn for it. The knight in the center now very much under a genuine attack. The knight will have to go back, but when it does, Alexandra will start trading off the defensive pieces surrounding the black king. Things are not looking good for the younger sister. Andrea wisely choosing to avoid the trades to keep her bishop in the king's vicinity, but she is still struggling with her time management. Alexandra has moved her knight up, attacking the black queen. The queen retreats. Now the white rook in the corner is under attack, and wow, what way to defend the rook. Alexandra goes for castling. Andrea instead trying to go for the queen trade. Queen trade, generally a very good idea when your king is under extreme pressure, like Black's king was here. Alexandra probably doesn't want to trade queens, but decides there's no better option. Afterwards, the knight moves away from danger, putting also pressure on the black rook in the corner of the board. The fact that Andrea managed to trade the queens has made this game way more open. As now there are no more attacking threats that Andrea has to deal with. There's no risk of being checkmated anytime soon. D5 is an excellent move from Andrea. She's trying to sacrifice a pawn to bring her bishop to life. The engines are saying that there's only 2 moves to give white a winning position, and Alexandra doesn't find it. That D5 move, I cannot emphasize enough, it was brilliant, but I'm not sure Andrea herself realized why it was brilliant. And oh my gosh, here she comes with the king. Andrea moving the king out into the open of the board. Yes, we did trade off the queens, but that doesn't mean that checkmate does not exist. And Alexandra moves her rook to point down on the black king with some clever tactical retorts. Andrea afterwards loses on time to make the score in the match 4-0. They wanted this match to last 2 hours. Right now it looks as though, oh my gosh, Alexandra taking the piss. Wow, Alexandra going for the king f7 opening. Andrea has a terrible score against this play with a humiliating 4-0 lead. Alexandra is just putting in the final nails in Andrea's coffin. She's relying on Andrea to be so tilted. Wow, the Botez family is something else, huh? Normally, this is the kind of thing you don't want to be doing with your friends and your family. You want to spare them the humiliation of beating them with the worst opening ever, but not here. Not now. Right now, the computer engines are saying Black's position is the most awful thing they've ever seen, which is not unreasonable because the Black King has not castled. The White Knight is very well placed in the center of the board. White has gotten all of their pieces out, whereas Black's Queen side is completely undeveloped. And Andrea, true to her style, decides to spend all of her time thinking about a decision that probably wasn't all that important. Andrea now down to 1 minute on the clock. Her position is amazing. And Alexandra blunders the queen. If the queen had taken the white bishop, then the rook would move down and give checkmate on the black king. Andrea gets the option of capturing the black queen, but decides not to do so. That means the black queen still needs to get out of dodge. The problem being when the queen moves, the rook will come in on the bottom rank to give a check on the king and capture the rook in the corner. And at this point, Andrea is better on placement of the pieces, better on pawn structure, better on development, better on having a queen. There's one thing she's not better on, and that is time. They get 2 additional seconds per move they make. Why are you thinking here, Andrea? There's a free pawn. Okay, Andrea does find the free pawn, putting pressure now on the rook in the corner. The rook will have to move, but then the white knight will come in with a check on the black king. Alexandra tries to move the king away as quickly as possible. And Alexandra, realizing that they are playing with 2-second increments, she resigns the game. Game number 6. Andrea has won her first game of the match, but her King's Indian opening has not been amazing. She hasn't really been able to use the plans in a good way. And despite getting bad positions in every single game, she keeps playing the same moves. Here we have a trade in the center. After you made the trade, it would be nice if the knight could come put pressure on the bishop, but you move the knight to a different square. I don't know how much of this is my fault, but I gave her one plan and she's kind of convinced that that one plan fits every situation. But we got an interesting fight going on. Somehow black's position is not dead lost yet. Notice how white has put almost all of her pawns on the light squares. This means that the pawns are doing a very poor job of controlling the dark squares. And that is precisely what Andrea is trying to exploit right now. After castling from Alexandra, Andrea needs to take very special care of the knight in the middle of the board, currently under attack. There's also some pressure down on black's queen. Getting the queen out to the side of the board would be the optimal strategy, and it is also the strategy chosen by Andrea. Alexandra moving her king out of the way. Andrea coming in with the bishop, starting to put pressure on white's pawns. For the first time in this match, Andrea is also up on the clock. We have seen that Andrea often gets into trouble when she's low on time, but it's actually quite an evenly fought match beyond that. And here we see Andrea making the most of her chances. Knight takes pawn, good move, and Botez with the Botez gambit. It's the second Botez gambit in 6 games. Andrea takes down this game to make it 4-2. But Alexandra is not resigning, but yeah, she's down a queen for a knight, so it's just a matter of time. Alexandra is now down 5 pawns and a queen, and she's down on time, and she resigns. Next game, Alexandra gives up the silly opening. This just got real. Alexandra, having lost 2 games in a row, she's not happy with how this is going. And here we see a repeat of the old Indian opening she is using to counter Andrea's London opening. This time, Andrea is not going to play the move A5 because, as we have learned, we're trying to stop black from pushing the pawns forward on the queen side, not trying to make it easier. Instead, she's maneuvering her knight towards the c4 square. Good maneuvering there from Andrea. Black is a little bit cramped, and Andrea trying to exploit that by pushing her pawns up in the center. Aggressive play from Andrea. Alexandra has played very, very well here to put her pawns into motion, and Andrea is now realizing that the black pawns are about to take off. It does seem like Andrea is back to her old bad habits of spending too much time. I will agree with her that this is an important moment to spend time. We've seen her get away with some chaotic play earlier, as long as she managed to keep up on time. Right now, getting down a minute 20 seconds on the clock is probably more detrimental to her chances than playing a bad move. It's now down 1 minute and 38 seconds. She does go for the trade in the center. I think that was the appropriate decision to make. But now the black bishop on the diagonal pointing down towards the white knight, pawn, and rook. That bishop is very difficult to deal with. The black pawns are advancing forward on the side of the board. Black's position definitely for preference. Bishop f5, not the move though, because even though it attacks the white's knight, it also gives the white knight an opportunity to retreat and create a counterattack on the black bishop. She does go for the advance of the pawns on the queen side. That's a very good plan for black, well executed by Alexandra. Andrea, in the meantime, focusing her efforts in the middle, putting that rook on the open file. The only files without pawns are currently being controlled by the white rooks. So the white rooks are better placed than their black counterparts. The white knight is better placed than the black knight, but the big important difference here is the bishops. The black bishops are well placed with the long diagonals, while the white bishops are pointing into their own pawns on multiple fronts. And that is why Alexandra has the advantage. Andrea is down to just 20 seconds on the clock. It's still so little time, and it's so easy to make really big blunders when you're under that much pressure. Alexandra goes for the trade of rooks, and Andrea says no, but now the white rook is going to struggle getting out of that little prison Alexandra has concocted. The white rook is basically trapped. Andrea is having to make some very dodgy moves, trying to create space for the rook to get out. Andrea then sacrificing her knight for a pawn, but that pawn was defended. And now after the trade of rooks, at the end of all of these captures, Alexandra is up by a full rook. And once again, Andrea is taken down by her own time management, or should I say lack thereof. And the black rook, as it invades on the side of the board, this is a dominating display from Alexandra. An attempt for perpetual check was made, but in the end, it's Alexandra coming in for the checkmate. She wins the Battle of Botezlavia with a score of 5-2.
Hammer, do you have anything to say about my chess?
The first game was good.
Yep.
Yes.
And then I flagged.
Yeah, I feel like maybe that was a bit unnecessary.
But was the chess good? I felt
Not
like
so
I was
much, no.
holding my ground pretty well.
That would be one interpretation.
I really thought I was destroying her. I am shocked.
But if you thought you were destroying her, why were you spending so much time?
Yeah, some questions don't deserve answers, and that's one of them.